Tim Goldstein, autistic adult, and your host for Life in a Neurotypical Universe, where we take a look at life from the perspective of an autistic adult. This episode of Life in the Neurotypical Universe is very unique. Normally, I'm the host and I have a guest, but in this one, I'm actually going to be the guest. And our host is Ed Thompson, who's founder and CEO of Uptimize, which is the leading educator in neurodiversity, neuroinclusion for companies. The way this came about was Ed asked me to be on one of his webinars where we do a fireside chat and just kind of have a chat with each other. And Ed and I have known each other quite a while, as you'll hear from the episode. And it came out so well that I asked him if I could use the audio and just turn it into an episode of my podcast. So we're going to hear a very unique episode with me being the guest and Ed being the host. Well, let's dive on in.
Welcome, everybody. Can see lots of people joining, which is great. Team is here ready to go. Let's give it a sec and we'll get things moving. Thanks, everyone, for joining, as always. Really appreciate seeing you here. Been excited about this conversation with Tim for some time. Was just saying to him offline that it's long overdue. I think you're all going to enjoy this one. So, Tim, let's get cracking. This is Ed Thompson with Uptimize. Delighted to be joined today by Tim Goldstein for one of our very informal fireside chat series. A little bit of background to me and Tim and Uptimize. It was actually shortly after I moved to Denver. One of the reasons moved to Denver, not least because my wife is from here, but we also had an investor based here. And one of the first conversations I had with him, having moved here, he said, you know what, I met somebody the other day who was saying a lot of the same things that you say, passionate about a lot of the same things you seem to be passionate about. You should meet him. And he's in Denver. And this was back at a time where far fewer people, Tim, as you remember, were talking about neurodiversity at work. And you and I both were, and we met and had a great conversation. You know, the first of many. And since then, you've been a valued friend, but also subject matter expert for Uptimize and contributing to our journey, just as we look to contribute and certainly admire your journey in this field. So I'm really delighted to have you here today. I've always found you a very interesting conversationalist on this topic, combination of your lived experience, but also your strategizing of what needs to be different here, I think is quite rare, and why you're such a good subject matter expert on this topic, period. So really happy to have you. Just give everyone just a quick introduction, if for those of you, those people who don't know you, who is Tim Goldstein?
Well, first, thank you very much for the wonderful introduction. I'm Tim Goldstein, obviously, and I didn't know I was autistic until I was 54 years old. So I was diagnosed at 54, and it was kind of a little bit of a shock. But on the other hand, it means that I had a lot of lived experience just thinking I was the same as everybody else. And I had ups and downs. Some things worked well, and then they didn't work well. But I think that's something that gave me some unique insight, is thinking I was the same as everybody else, but knowing there were some differences. And as you said, we ran into each other. I think it was actually at an SAP conference, is when we first met back in like 2016 or something, where I think everybody involved in the whole thing was at that conference. And we didn't call it neurodiversity at work then, we called it autism at work. And of course, it has since grown to be, much more broad than just autism. And I guess my take and specialty on this thing is in some of my ups and downs in careers, I had a bunch of marketing and such background. And then I realized you've got to speak in the terminology of your audience. And we like to, in this field, use all these terms and illustrations and such that aren't what our audience understands. They just don't get the picture. And I am from the tech world. And fortunately, I always worked in the database area. And database people have to talk to the business people because otherwise you can't understand their data. So I've had lots of experience of talking across that gap and gulf and learning how to put it and how to explain it in ways that the other group can get. So I guess that's the, kind of the top line, quick and dirty, through this. I do work for a major tech company and have had the, joy, luxury, I don't know, terror, I don't know what you call it, of speaking to, more companies than I ever imagined I would in my life of, Fortune 500s and global companies and all that stuff. So been great. I mean, always been great working with you. And, we pretty much have the same goal to change how businesses look at, neuro-distinct individuals all the way around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting, to your point about your experience of diagnosis and when that came for you, having written A Hidden Force, interviewed lots of people in the neurodivergent community, you really have, at this point in time, with diagnoses becoming more available and accessible than ever before, but still imperfectly so, you really have the whole kind of gamut of people who've been diagnosed as a child and had that identity quite early on. I interviewed somebody for the book who had her entire career without a diagnosis, and of course then nobody being aware of that part of her identity as she wasn't. So I think that's an interesting thing for organizations to be aware of, that while we can talk about neurodivergent people in the workforce, there are very many different experiences based on at what point did this become part of somebody's identity. And you're an example of somebody where you've had a later diagnosis, but not one that's so late that you can't dedicate a chunk of your career to then really advocating for the needs and experiences of people who share that identity.
I think it brings up an important point, which is, and again, you and I have talked about this so many times, that neurodistinct individuals, whether it's, if we want to just focus on autistics, just because that's what we have the most history on, are already in your company. It isn't a matter of if you're going to hire them. They're already there. The question is, are you going to give them, equity? Are you going to take advantage of what they're bringing, which is their unique perspectives? And I think as more companies realize they're already there, it reduces the friction, the fear of doing something about it. Because if it's something you've never done, and these are people we've never hired in our life, like is the narrative a lot of people give, that's scary. Do we bring in these people we've never hired?
Let's talk about that now. And actually, just to everybody, again, thank you so much for joining. Please do ask questions as we go to Tim, and I'll feed those into the questions that I would like to ask him already, that I know he's prepared for. So please do ask any questions in the chat. Something, Tim, we were talking about offline relates exactly to that, which is how have things changed over the last few years? You mentioned an Autism at Work conference, 2016, 2017, really the beginnings of this movement. But from a corporate side, it was very much a framework of, we don't have people like that now, which we know is false, but I think that was, to some extent, was the mentality. How do we go and find them? How have you seen neurodiversity at work change in the intervening period?
But what I see now is most of the companies that I talk to, as in probably almost all of them, are looking at it more from a DEI type lens, where they're looking to integrate and give equity to these individuals because they recognize they're there. And not looking at it as, oh, we need to go create this hiring program because there's this group of individuals that have talents we need. They're saying, really, okay, we already have these people. Let's try and get all those talents we need out of them because we make it comfortable for them to step forward and be who they are and express those unique perspectives. So that's the big change I've seen is the drive going from a business case of this is where we can get people that have the skills we need to the business case of we already have these people, but we're not getting all we should because I like to say, it's like being gay in the 70s. Why would you raise your hand and say you were gay in the 70s? There was absolutely like no positive thing that was going to come out of it. In a lot of companies, unfortunately, it's like that. If you're autistic, ADHD, whatever neurodistinction you have, there's nothing good to raise your hand and say, oh, by the way, I'm autistic. And suddenly you're a target.
Totally. And I think that organizations we talk to, who because they recognize that this has been an overlooked area, are often very inclusive minded, very passionate about the importance of people and so on. I think that's what takes them to then being some of the first to realize that this is something that they want to address. But even there, it's a very mixed picture as far as openness around identity as far as neurodivergence is concerned. And I think if we were to draw a sort of rough scale and say, the ideal is everybody can be who they are, and everybody can share their identity without fear of repercussion, and this is welcomed with an appropriately sort of nuanced appreciation of these identities. I don't think any organization is there, typically, certainly not when they start working with us. And really what you're looking at is gradations of less than that. Whether it's normally the best is some people will have been open and shared their diagnosis, but to some extent others don't know what to do with that. Versus right down the bottom is, look, we know we're pretty sure we've got a very neurodiverse team here, but we don't have the psychological safety for people to start sharing that. So to your point, there's a lot of work to do. I want to go to your experiences yourself, Tim, a little bit. So you've had such an interesting career. You've got to the top of organizations, but as you described before in your talks and to me, you've been fired as well for reasons that, I think were probably often slightly unfair. What barriers have you faced? What barriers did you face at work yourself?
Well, as you say, I tended to do well. So at first there weren't very many barriers, but eventually you get to the point where you have enough, I don't know what you say, control, power, authority, whatever you want to call it, that you can actually influence the direction, whatever the little section is that you work in, whether you're running a department or, leading a team or whatever. And oftentimes that's when the problem starts coming up because, as an autistic individual, I see the world differently. I see the problems differently. I tend to see them from the bottom up, give me all the facts and I'll make up what the concept is, as opposed to most people tend to say, here's the concept and now let's just, make it fit. And once you start getting that separation between, oh, this is the concept and you make it fit, and no, by the way, the facts actually say something else, then you start running into problems. I'd say the other big problem really was, and I like to say this goes back to communication, but, it's social issues. But the social issues are generated through communication. I don't think social issues just prop up out of nowhere. I think they're communication based is what leads to the social faux pas. And one example that I talk about often is I was working for a company and they had hired this guru to do the data warehouse, and I was hired to implement the guru's design. And it was quite obvious the guru was false. So it took about a week and a half, and I figured out this guru did not know what they're doing. They're fake. And I went to the CTO and said, this person's fake and we need to do something. Not recognizing that he was relatively new And being right was something that was super important to him, being perceived as being right. So his cure of the problem was fire Tim because Tim's saying one of my decisions are bad versus actually look at, is there an issue there? So, I mean, that would be another one of the kinds of things where not following and understanding those social nuances of this person was very image driven, that he wanted people to look at him as being the leader and being right. And my communication was, no, you're wrong on this one. And so those kind of things, are very much challenges that come up on a regular basis.
Very, very common. I think the for some anyway, bottom up thinking and as you say, the very constructive minded decision to share some of these thoughts when you can see the ship sailing in the wrong direction, and then that often political dimension coming in and shooting that down. And it's something that more and more people talking, of course, about psychological safety, but the more I and we research the topic, the more I think that often isn't present. And interesting data that suggests about 40% of the workforce in the US feel like their ideas aren't particularly welcomed and valued. Now that's more than the neurodivergent. So this is really an endemic problem of, I think, organizations and leaders thinking they have all the answers, which often comes from that sort of hitting that first curve. You found something that works, product market fit, let's just kind of process it, let's operate it. Great, but actually that's never going to be optimized if we don't listen to ideas of not just how do we improve the process, which is valuable, but actually what's the second curve.
And right. Is it even the right process? Is sometimes the right process? Question.
Yeah.
If we look at Elon Musk is a great example. One of his first questions is, are we even solving the right problem? I just read an interesting article. He was trying to catch the fairings coming off the rockets and had the funny ship with a big, huge net that was trying to catch the rocket fairings. And they gave up on that. They just canned it. And the decision was that was the wrong problem to solve. The problem to solve was, how do you make them more durable so when they do hit the ocean that you don't destroy all the electronics? That was a much easier problem to solve.
But I think there's an openness to this that needs to come right at the beginning. And I again heard from folks I interviewed for the book that they were asked problem-solving questions in interviews and giving quite left field, if you like, answers to those, which really an enlightened manager should be thinking, gosh, that's great. I would have gone straight through the front door and this person's going through the back window. Well, that's going to make a pretty good combination. But actually, I think there's too much in interviewing and assessment of, I'm looking for a certain answer, which is the sort of the best answer I would come up with, and not enough openness to somebody who just sees it differently. And just seeing it differently, I hope some of the work we do at Uptimize just helps to change that's just such a special thing. And we have that with some of our advisors, investors, and so on, team members. Just the fact that they obviously just approach things so differently is so valued. But I wish it was, more broadly.
I like to put it this way. And generally, I normally say this when people ask about, do you belong? But it's exactly, fits in with what you're saying is, I feel like I belong and I'm being listened to and, included and respected. If people will consider my suggestions or answers as if they potentially could be right. Not that I have the right answer, but they'll take the same effort they would if somebody else's one of, well, let's look at that. Maybe there is something there. And if the answer is no, well, that's okay. You at least had gave me the respect of treating me as if I could some days actually deliver a good answer. So you actually examined it.
Absolutely. And for anyone who's read Ray Dalio and his approaches to building his hedge fund and the idea of collective decision making, it really is quite important, those subtleties, that you want to allow everybody to contribute to decision making to some extent, because that decision making is going to be richer. It's the wisdom of crowds, and you can have that fresh thought of, hold on, why are we going left when really we should be going right, is valuable. But you have the nuance as well of that weighted believability. So if we're talking about something related to the US, Tim, between the two of us, you're going to have the advantage of me being American. Doesn't mean you're right, but it means you're probably more likely to be right, and I should respect that. I think ultimately a lot of the time in teams it goes too far to the weighted believability, where it's the leader's right and the individual's wrong, and there isn't that chance to contribute an idea that actually is then at least considered.
Well, right. It's actually sometimes your lack of familiarity with the subject that gives you that unique insight. As you coming in, not being from the UK, not from the US, you see things that kind of stick out that to us are just, well, that's just norm. We don't even think about it. So sometimes it's that lack that gives you that unique ability to point to something that everybody else is just so used to, they don't think about it anymore.
If anyone wants to join Ed's take on the USA webinar, we could do that as a future session. I want to pick up, Leslie. Great to see you in the chat, and someone else who was interviewed for my book, which is always great for me to see. Thank you for joining. I want to look at Leslie's question, but I want to kind of skew it a little bit to ask you a question, Tim, based on it. She's talking about how her experience is that people are sort of more open to people who think differently than people who may appear to behave differently. I suppose it's the behaving differently can be kind of scary, and people feel, well, I don't understand that, and it's not what I expect, and I'm worried about managing. But I want to just take that question and ask you something, because you've talked in the past, and of course, you had 54 years of not knowing you were autistic, but you've talked in the past about, and you've written about some of the challenges of somebody like you who doesn't appear necessarily to be neurodivergent, who doesn't have those behavioral differences. You've talked to me about the voice coaching that you've had. You're an extremely polished speaker and interlocutor. What are some of the challenges that you have in that people don't look at you and think, okay, this person's behaving differently, and they won't necessarily put you in a box?
The way that I normally describe it, and by the way, hello, Leslie, you and I have, it's been way too long since we've had a meeting and chatted with each other. So we need to get that on the calendar again. I describe it as the uncanny valley. And for those of you not familiar, the uncanny valley came out of robotics, and came from a Japanese roboticist back in the 70s. And Japanese tend to be more oriented to making robots that look realistic, as opposed to Americans that tend to be more oriented towards robots that function, and if whatever they look like, they look like. And what he found was, as the robot got closer and closer to looking humanistic, people had more affinity to it. I like to say, if you take your Roomba and you put some little ears on it and a tail, now it becomes part of the family, and you have a little more affinity towards it than just this thing rolling around cleaning your floor. And I haven't put the ears and tail on my Roomba yet, but it's waiting for it. But what happens though is it gets really close, but not quite realistic as a human. It starts becoming obvious that there's something that's not right. And at that point, what the gentleman found was people's affinity towards it dropped off the cliff. And suddenly there was a revulsion to it, as opposed to it had been building to a point where they were feeling quite, connected to it. And suddenly it just dove into like nothing of, get this thing away. This is weird. There's something wrong with it. And then when you got it perfect, then it, would come back up again. And I think that's what happens is when you can go into a situation, and in most situations, there's no tells that you do, perceive the world differently and process it differently and interact sometimes differently. Sooner or later, there will be one. Maybe it's a bad day. You tripped over the dog, you dumped your coffee down the front of yourself, the car wouldn't start, you go in, you're just not on the top of your game. Or maybe it's just a situation that comes up and something becomes obvious that you reacted or responded in a way that was not normal. So suddenly oh my God, it's not what I thought it was. And at that point, you get the exact same reaction as the uncanny valley. People suddenly start rejecting you because it's obvious now that you're not who they thought you were. And it's probably worse than if they knew ahead of time who you were, which is why I always say disclose, because they're feeling like you've been pulling, the wool over their eyes, all along, that you've been pretending you're something you're not.
And I hope, again, just general awareness of some of these differences is helping here. It was interesting to me to talk with university students in a neurodiversity support program, all extremely smart, capable young people, asking them, what is it, if anything, about the workplace that you're concerned about? This was that they're all going into their first job. None of them said, I'm not going to be able to do the job, right? All of them said, what if I just say something slightly out of place? What if I say something and I offend somebody and nobody else tells me? That's the concern. And maybe that will never be fully addressable, but I do think more awareness of some of these differences can only be constructive here. I want to pick up on Leslie's question as well, just to think about the real essence of it, which is one of the reasons I think this has all changed. We talked about it's gone from hiring to inclusion, if you like. I think one of the things that's helped change that is neurodivergent people in organizations finding their voice, coming together, the growth of the neurodiversity ERG and so on. We've seen in organizations the difference where one neurodivergent person goes to their boss and says, hey, we should be doing this, and the boss says, maybe, but not now, versus 50. It's harder to ignore the 50. But to Leslie's question, and it's a question that we're often asked, what would you recommend as, let's say you found yourself in an organization that, nobody's really talking about this, but you yourself are passionate about it. The organization is by definition neurodiverse, but there isn't that openness. How would you be thinking about trying to get this topic on its radar?
Well, this feels like the real world right now of what I actually live in. I am at an organization that from the high level of, DEI and such, neurodiversity isn't even on the roadmap. And there is no recognition of it. And the answer really is you keep looking for anybody that you can ally with, whether they are your same neurodistinction, whether they're a different neurodistinction, whether they just have a kid that is, whether they have, it doesn't matter. So anybody that's willing to support it, it doesn't matter why, you have support. And you keep trying. You keep trying again and again and again. I don't know how many different groups I've talked to within the company that I'm at. And some of them just did a one-time talk and then never went anywhere with it. Other ones are moving ahead and trying to do more with it. So I think the real reality is you have to become an activist. And you have to insert yourself into anything that you can find out about, or any place that it's potentially possible to spread your message, which is taking risks. Certainly, I've been told plenty of times that's not my job. Go do my job, and I still do it.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where you or we at Uptimize, when we were asked that question, we can't guarantee the response. We have no control over the response. We can suggest you recommend something to your manager, to HR, but we don't have control over that response. But I do think, on a more positive note, and seeing how many organizations we're working with and who've kind of cracked that glass ceiling and really are embracing this, it in a sense it's easier than you think, I think, because it's such an overdue and needed topic, and there's so many people who are either neurodivergent or of course have close family, friends who are. There's this great sort of latent affinity group, I think, in organizations that you can start to connect with, and 2 can become 4, can become 10, and so on. And right to the point of, some of you will remember the session with Ubisoft the first time I spoke with Pierre, who runs their group, he said, we're close to 400 people in the group. And I said, whoa, I need to interview you for the book. But that's what's happening, because I think there is that interest. And I think that same principle goes for whether you're in an ERG or whether you're a program builder here and you've actually brought this to the company and you're thinking, okay, how are folks going to react? And this is the first time we've ever, provided tools, solutions, and so on around this topic. It really is, again, we've just seen it again and again, often a very enthusiastic, appreciative response in the organization. So it can look more challenging, I think, than it is. I get that it is if you go to your manager and your manager says, keep doing what you're doing, shut up. But we've also seen it work, and I hope that gives people some confidence as well. Couple more questions. I'm going to take one now from.
I'm actually just going to say about that one thing of going out and connecting. I think is another big thing in organization. If it's a larger organization, is if you meet somebody over here that is willing to support, and you meet somebody over there that's willing to support, being the connector and introducing them to each other is probably one of the best things you can do. And some of those are, people or groups that most people don't want to approach. I set up a meeting a couple of years ago now with the head of accommodations. Most people are scared of going to accommodations, but accommodation is the key. I want him on this game. I want him on this team. And I've introduced him to, I don't know how many people. And it's been very positive. So I think that's another part is not just get to know who is willing to support, but be that connector that connects the person from this department that doesn't know about the person in that department.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, look, I mean, we could talk about this more, and we've had many a session around, the ERG building. I think that there is danger that comes with success, that actually you can be seen as, okay, well, great, Tim's the neurodiversity person, and like he's going to do everything, and he can run a load of sessions and train everybody, and you actually get too much on your plate, and yet your line manager is saying this is not your day job, and you're kind of stretched both ways. So there are challenges that come with it. I want to take a question from Dr. Lee Holcomb around retention and career planning and support. And I want to contextualize that back to what we said about how, this field really started with hiring, I think, being the focus, and now more of an appreciation that this is about more of a kind of holistic inclusion. And of course, part of that is making sure that everybody has a path to stick around. I would tie this absolutely to big HR metrics of today. Look, 1 in 3, 1 in 4 corporate employees leave voluntarily every year. That's a bit of an expensive crisis for organizations. So we want to make sure everybody feels like they're having a great experience when it comes to this stuff. And of course, our neurodivergent employees, regardless of whether or not they've disclosed. What are some best practices you've seen there, either specifically within a neurodiversity program or simply universal design, good practice, good for everybody?
It really comes down to, I think, retention. We could look at it all different ways, but if we look at it from the DEI lens, obviously salaries need to be commensurate with the rest of the industry, and working conditions need to be, commensurate with what's appropriate for the industry. If you're a sweatshop that underpays, well, it really doesn't matter what else you do. You're probably not going to improve your retention. But assuming that, you're about the same as any of your peer companies.
Yeah.
I really think it's the inclusion and equity portion. It's making these people feel as if they belong, as if they have a voice, as if they're respected for who they are, and they don't have to go around hiding who they are.
And so how do you do that in practice?
Well, that is a big challenge. We've had a challenge with that in every group. It really started with bringing women into the workplace, was probably the first big inclusion movement. We've done better. Have we done perfect? No. Obviously, there's still room to go. And as we see it with other groups, there's even more room to go. But it's really, we have to look at what is it about that particular group that would make them feel included? And different groups have different things that would make them feel included. So we really need to have the participation of those members helping guide us in what is it that would make them feel this is a workplace they want to stay around, other than the simply money and how fancy your chairs are.
Yeah, I look, I think that's right, and the reason we do so much community connection work is because I think we can all learn from lived experience, real experience, and that is going to inform management, people, process, technology, really across the organization. People struggle with certain types of tools or processes. We can hear that from the horse's mouth. But I think
I think one of the big ones for the neurodistinct individuals that comes up at virtually every company I've talked to is the accommodation process. And in most companies, the accommodation process is rather opaque. I've talked to a few companies where it's not, and they do much better. But in most companies, it's go talk to these people that you don't want to talk to in the first place because they're HR, and go fill out these forms that are divulging things that you really don't want to divulge. And maybe or maybe not, they will do something. And maybe or maybe not, they'll go tell your manager that you did apply for an accommodation. And I'm not saying that any of those are right or wrong, because there are laws that do govern this in the US. It's ADA, of course. And it says it has to be a reasonable accommodation. So sometimes they do have to go to your manager to say, would this be reasonable? But because people don't know the process, it's not written out. There's no guide to applying for a accommodation at our company.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen that a lot. And I mean, right down to, we have organizations that I think wrongly want to sort of know who everybody is, and that's their kind of starting point, and we always have to slightly guide them off that. But I mean, even if that is your starting point, again, I don't think that's the right one. Just, you've talked about this before, just saying, do you think of yourself as disabled or not, and just lumping everybody in that bracket, and that's probably not the way to do it. And we often hear accommodation or adjustment processes being very opaque, very medicalized, overwhelming, feeling you're it's out of control. You told one person and suddenly 4 people know, and all of this stuff. And I think that just really considering that process and optimizing that process and making that a process that people feel comfortable to go down and feel like they're going to be in the driver's seat, the whole time is huge. Just to add, I think, from an Uptimize perspective to the question of kind of inclusion as relating to retention, I think it's much better to think about and look at neurodiversity holistically, and to start with the fact that a team is neurodiverse and everyone's bringing their own thinking style to the table. And how do we optimize that, which everybody buys into and we know is going to help everybody? That's the universal design thing, than the old model of, let's hire a load of folks who have a particular diagnosis and an openness about it. Let's throw them into Team X, and then let's think about, how do they stick? And Uptimize, would very much lean towards the more holistic way as being not just more effective, but also more realistic as far as just how the workforce works. And we know candidate pools are neurodiverse by definition, and you already have neurodivergent people in your candidate pools in your organization as well. So we can't draw these perfect lines. And I think part of the challenges come from trying to draw the lines and thinking, well, how do we fit this group in with this group?
I watched a lecture from a professor at Berkeley, and it was recommended to me by somebody I'm working with on neurodiversity effort at the company I'm at. And it was very, very interesting. The big point, there was a lot of great points in it, but a big point, and this goes with what you were saying, that there is a huge wide range of thinking. And what his point was is, as humans, we want to bucket things, and we want to put things into a bucket. But his big point really was, okay, that's what we do as humans. But if once we put it in the bucket, we tend to not notice the difference of the things in the same bucket, how different they really are, even though we put them in that bucket. And we don't notice if you have the, here's the line that divided between X and Y. We don't recognize how similar X and Y are because we put a line between them arbitrarily. So we don't realize the similarities. And when you think about it that way, what's the difference whether it's your personality and we go with, pick your favorite disc or, whatever personality test. Those are all different ways of thinking. Maybe not as extreme as the neurodistincts, but they're still, but we put them in this neurotypical bucket and we pretend like they're all the same. And the reality is there's huge variation there already.
Absolutely. And I think part of it, again, is, coming back to the issue of the kind of the medicalized framing, seeing sort of normal as most, and then a few not normal on the fringes. And to Leslie's point earlier, I think that's where there's that fear of people who behave totally differently. It's not what you're used to. I think we have to embrace in this field that to some extent, we're all more different than we're appreciating, but to some extent that in itself is a shared experience and makes us similar. It is a similarity we have in a paradoxical way, that we all have our own way of thinking and working. And so that's a commonality across the species. And so, we don't have to draw these lines. I think that's an important kind of balance to.
It's almost as if we're all really outsiders. So if we're outsiders, we can look at ourselves now as being similar because we are from the outside. So you're right. It's kind of a paradoxical thing.
Yeah, but I think appreciating difference is something that we're sometimes a bit fearful to do, because I think there's the idea of kind of colorblind as an approach that, that's not something that should be taken into account. And of course, understandably so. In this case of neurodiversity, it's somewhere where we really have to appreciate some of these differences exist, albeit that they are, the ultimate human differences of just, in a way, how our brains work. So thank you, everybody, for joining. I want to just ask you, Tim, one more question, but before we close out. So I know everybody in this field has their bugbears, their frustrations. What do you wish were different? What do you see organizations maybe getting wrong? What do you wish, organizations maybe looked at in a different way here that you think would have a positive impact on this whole field, continuing to advance?
I think one of the biggest things, and I've been vocal about this for, I think, ever since I heard the statistic. People throw out continually this statistic that 15% of the autistic population are employed. That's it. 85% is unemployed. And I'm convinced if that's true. And again, I don't want to forget the other neurodistinctions that are out there. They count just as much, but it started as autism. We have more track record numbers on that side. Plus, I'm autistic, so that's the side I pay attention to. I think if it's 15% are employed, I work with every single one of the employed autistic individuals in the world, which can't be true. And I finally went and actually sat down and operated the numbers, which we can easily do. And came up with the number being every 23 companies. There's only one autistic person hired by every 23 companies. If you use 15% as being the number. And we know that's not true. I mean, any of us that have done anything in this field know you can go into any company over 10, 15 people, and there's going to be, somebody there. Company with 1,000 people, there's tons of people there. And I think what is important about that is recognizing that these people are already in your company. Not that this is a risky thing that you have to sell to management, that we're going to embrace this group that has been underemployed. Which, if you're going to go around saying they're underemployed, the first question is, okay, what's the matter with them, right? I mean, if they're underemployed,
and is this just charity? I think to pick up on that, it's incredibly important actually, because those foundational pieces of market data are really important, because they become currency that shapes how people think about the space. And to your point, if you if that's the major piece of market data being bandied around a boardroom, it does then lead you to think, well, gosh, we probably haven't got any of these people as well. Can they work? Yes, they can. Let's go and try and find some. What roles can they do? Or they probably can't do this. But all of these misconceptions are going to come from that. Whereas I think absolutely what we need is, and there, of course, that exists, and we highlight a little bit market data around the fact of your teams are neurodiverse. I mean, that's where we should be starting, not that folks can't get jobs. I think it's probably reasonable to say, based on the community, and we don't have the data, but based on the community experiences that we've seen, that organizations could be more neurodiverse and are often excluding neurodivergent talent in the hiring processes. And unemployment may indeed be proportionally higher within some of these demographics as a result. I think that's pretty obvious. But I agree. I think there's a danger of taking a stat like that, which doesn't have much evidence behind it. In fact, a lot of what we all kind of see and hear every day suggests that it must be wrong. And you've done some math there to suggest it. Can really kind of warp things. So I think that's a really good point and a good way to kind of wrap this up.
Yeah, I definitely. I think if companies recognize that they already had those individuals, the next question really becomes, how do we get the value they can bring out of them that we're not doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tim, thank you for being part of this. Again, long overdue, and a pleasure to have a conversation as always, and a pleasure to share it with you all who joined. So thank you. Been getting great feedback on these fireside chats, so we'll keep them coming. We have some other events of different types in the works as well. Again, thank you everybody for spending your time with us for moving this forward. I often see names in our participant list who I know are doing wonderful things themselves. Folks I've interviewed, folks we've had on the sessions as well. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you and look forward to the next installment. So have a great day, everybody. Thanks again, Tim, for being part of today's conversation.
Thanks for having me. For those of you who want to know more about Uptimize, you can go and find them on the web. Very simple, at Uptimize.com. And I'll put that down in the show notes so that you can easily find his website. And you can learn more about Ed there, along with his complete team and the very, very unique system they have of a hybrid of both online and in-person or virtual training all combined together. So if you're looking to have your company with having a great resource for training in neuroinclusion and neurodiversity, go check out Uptimize and see what Ed has to offer. And thank you, Ed, for letting me be on your webinar and sharing it for use as my podcast. We hope that you've enjoyed another episode of Life in a Neurotypical Universe. Please, if you enjoyed this, share it with your friends. Go take their phone and subscribe them. It will help us all out. If you want to know more about neurodiversity or have any questions for me, you can reach me at my website, timgoldstein.com, where I'll be more than glad to help you as best I can to navigate through the neurotypical universe.